who's in the room. Thank you. Just as a note, this meeting will be recorded. We hope that you all can share this webinar with people who in your spheres of influence who are not able to join. But we appreciate all of those of you who are able to join and are here now. We're going to get started in a few minutes. All right, Virginia Kerr, Princeton. Hey, Virginia, how's it going? Thank you so much for being here. Mass Incarceration Task Force. Abraham, nursing president, 17th Ward, North Carolina. Welcome, North Carolina. T.C. Morrow, my colleague, founder United Methodist Church, and also NRCAT. Thank you, T.C., for being here. Ms. Annie Williams Jr., Illinois. Shout out to Illinois, National Coalition of Prisoner Voting Rights. Davis from is that California? CA, California? James Catholic Church. Diane, thank you, Diane, for being here. Shai McGuire, Towers for Change.org, Mount Dora, Florida. Nice. We have a very good geographic reach here. So far, we got Florida, Virginia, Illinois, DC. I'm in Jersey, y'all. By way of New York. I lied and tell people that I'm in New York, but I'm really in New Jersey. But if you're from here, you'll understand. Yes, Linda, Multifaith E-M-I. Shout out to our colleagues, Multifaith. We have more folks joining. Thank you, everybody, for joining. For those of you who are joining, please drop your name, any organizational or affiliation to a faith space that you have, if you care to share, but mainly your state as well. I want to make sure that we get a feel for who's in the room, our geographic reach. Bruce, thank you for being here. Multifaith E-M-I, fellow colleague, Jewish Council, JCPA, and volunteer with the Interfaith Action Rights out of Maryland. Shout out to Maryland. Susan Hiscox out of Texas. Yes, shout out to Texas. Georgia, Katrina, thank you so much for being here. So far, so close. Deirdre, my fellow board member from MFI, calling in from North Carolina. Katie, of course, in the background. And also the glue that helps us put all of this together. Thank you so much for being here, Katie. Also a fellow colleague on the board of E-M-I. Angelita Clifton, or Angelica, sorry if I'm messing up your name, please correct me. Summit, New Jersey. Shout out to New Jersey. Found-based Baptist Church. Chicago, Illinois. I'll be in Chicago soon, September 3rd to the 5th. Actually, for our board meeting. Always looking to connect. So Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition, shout out to you. Our very own Dr. Terry Cooper's one of our leaders in the space around our solitary confinement work and conditions, and of course, a number of other things from the California Mandela Act. Jana, thank you so much for being here, fellow MFI board member out of Atlanta, Archdiocese of Atlanta. We're almost going to get started. You have 3 more minutes. Gay Gardner, hey, Gay, thank you so much for joining with Interfaith Action of Human Rights out of Virginia. Patricia Bennett, empowering men and women in the move to Atlanta in Georgia. Shout out to Georgia. Aaron Kerr, Adrian in Michigan. Shout out to Michigan. Nice. Thank you, folks, for joining. The new people who are joining, please drop your name in the chat and location. Well, not your name, like location and any affiliations that you have. It shows that Richard left. It's okay. We'll send him the follow-up email. He probably had something to do. Nice. Thank you all for joining, y'all. We're going to go ahead and jump right into it. And as folks join, they can, just drop their information in the chat so we can get a feel for who's in the room. My name is Johnny Perez. I work as the Director of U.S. Prison Programs for the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. And I'm very honored to moderate today's panel. NRCAT has been a founding member of the Multifaith E-M-I Men in Mass Incarceration since one of our first conferences at Ebenezer Church. At that pivotal moment, we brought a mock solitary cell and shared, of course, the harrowing experience of solitary survivors like myself and faith leaders in their work around ending the torture of solitary confinement. This experience was so powerful that solitary confinement throughout the years has been one of a number of core issues within Multifaith E-M-I, as some of you who attended the Dallas conference and the Dallas conference learned. We're incredibly proud, of course, of our ongoing partnership and support that we've received, not only from the leadership of E-M-I, which I'll be introducing, Reverend Devon, Jerome Crawford in a second, but of course also from including our fellow board members some of which who already identified themselves in the chat and who are in this conversation with us as well. With that being said, I will be sharing detailed bios of the panelists after Reverend Crawford kind of opens us up with some opening remarks. So with that being said, I'd like to create space for the Executive Director of Multifaith EMI, Reverend Devon Jerome Crawford. Thanks, Reverend Bishop.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Can everyone hear me? Wonderful. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to join and be with all of you this evening. I see so many familiar faces from the EMI network from across the length and breadth of this country. It's such a blessing to see all of you as we continue this work of gathering in a freedom summer. We began this conversation series of freedom conversations really after the unconference effort that brought us all together to think about how we might continue to work together, struggle together, co-conspire together for the freedom and liberation of our justice-impacted siblings. The Multifaith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration is a movement, an institution-based movement for the spiritual, social, political, economic liberation of our justice-impacted siblings and their families. We do this work using narrative advancement, congregational engagement, and public policy education, working with a variety of tremendous partners across the length and breadth of this country, principal among them being the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. Much appreciation to my colleague and brother, Johnny Perez, for his steady, steadfast leadership in this space and across the country as we work to really end this moral scourge of mass incarceration and ending this practice of solitary confinement, which really stands in stark contradiction to many of the values and virtues that our faith communities hold true with respect to the dignity of human personalities, with respect to being able to see the divine in our brothers and our sisters, our siblings in this world. And so the work that we're doing as we work to end solitary confinement is holy work. This is sacred work as we work with movement momentum to end the legacies of slavocracy in this country. That we are continuing in a legacy that includes ancestors, one by the name of Fannie Lou Hamer, who 60 years ago was denied the opportunity to sit as a delegate during a political convention, noting the work that she's done across the length and breadth of this country for voting rights for Black Americans during the Freedom Summer effort. And we continue with that same power and that same moral authority to end the moral scourge of mass incarceration. And so I'm so grateful for all of those who are the co-conveners, the co-discussants of this conversation. I want to acknowledge all of the members of the board of Multifaith EMI. I see Bruce Turnbull, Deirdre Reed, Johnny Perez, of course, Dr. Willie, Dwayne Francois, Katie Jones, and I believe I saw Linda Davis on the line as well. So grateful for all of your leadership, Jana Hofker, here in Atlanta, as we continue to do this work in beloved community. So I'm going to hand it back to Johnny as we delve into this necessary conversation as we think about how we engage in this moral moment as a beloved community. So Johnny, thank you so much.
Nice, thank you for that. It's been such an honor working with us, and we've come such a long way. And, you know, especially after our last conference, you know, folks are so motivated, and we're just like an unprecedented time in our country where, like, you know, folks are just showing up in ways in which we've never seen before. The conversation today, this program, and I'm going to drop a lot of things in the chat. So there's different ways you can download the chat, but we'll be following up with you all directly in terms of a lot of the resources that are shared, you know, during this conversation. But our program will explore the devastating impacts of solitary confinement on individuals. Sorry, what's my notes here? On individuals at the intersection of forced labor and solitary confinement under the 13th Amendment. And the crucial role that faith communities play in advocating for humane and systemic reform. Through insightful dialogue, of course, and we have our panelists, and we're going to share some strategies for mobilizing communities, influencing policy, and advancing a broader movement to end solitary confinement and to promote justice and human dignity, including ending slavery in this country once and for all. I'm going to drop the extended bios of our panelists in our chat. And instead of introducing them myself, because as moderator, I'm supposed to talk less, I'm going to actually invite our panelists to take a minute apiece to introduce themselves, starting with Bianca Tylek, and then and then followed by Reverend Jimmy Hawkins, and then Kiana Calloway. Thank you, and I'll drop their extended bios in the chat.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Hello, everybody. Really excited to be here. My name is Bianca Tylek. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director and founder at Worth Rises. We are a national criminal justice organization working to end the exploitation of people who are incarcerated and dismantling the prison industry. The prison industry is an $80 billion industry that preys on the carceral system and everyone who comes in contact with it, both those who are incarcerated, their families, as well as victims and crime survivors, to essentially make money. And so much of our work is to prevent the power of financial interests from corrupting, or at least we're starting to reverse that process as it's already happened in our system. I also am here as the person who leads the End the Exception campaign.
Can folks mute themselves, please, if they're up? Thank you so much.
Sorry. The End the Exception campaign is a national campaign coalition made up of over 90 national organizations working to end the exception in the 13th Amendment, which still allows slavery to be used as criminal punishment. And so working on that campaign and supporting many others. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Bianca. Reverend Hawkins, please.
Hi, Reverend Jimmy Hawkins, and I am the advocacy director for the Presbyterian Church USA. We have two advocacy offices. We have a office in New York, the Presbyterian Ministry at the United Nations. We also have a Washington office, the Office of Public Witness, and we do advocacy on, obviously, the UN level, dealing with issues of global justice, and also in DC on the federal level. We engage with the White House as we can. White Houses are not always receptive to faith communities, not as they say they are, but it's been a good 4 years, the last 4 years. But we also engage primarily with members of Congress, really try to engage with them on issues of justice. We have a wide array of justice issues, but this is especially one. We're very concerned with those who are incarcerated and with solitary confinement. And one of the things that we did at our last General Assembly in June was to pass an overture, a resolution condemning solitary confinement. And we're really excited about going forth as a church to encourage our congregations to be engaged in this issue. And we also engage with the State Department. And so we have a staff that works tirelessly. We reflect the social justice policies of the Presbyterian Church. And again, we have always been concerned about prisons. Back in 1915, we condemned debtor prisons. In the early part of the 21st century, we produced a statement against for-profit prisons. So this is an area near and dear to the heart of the Presbyterian Church. And I'm also a board member of NRCAT. Honored to be here tonight.
Thank you so much, Reverend Hawkins. Honored to have you here. Kiana Calloway.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kiana Calloway. I'm actually in my office, but I was on my computer and this is what happened. It just froze completely up. So I had to jump on my phone just to let them know that the devil is a liar. We're going to get through this today. My name is Kiana Calloway. I'm a part of the Louisiana Stop Solitary Coalition. And recently we've just, I'm now the director of the Impacted Solitary Survivors Council. Here in Louisiana, we have been working tirelessly to address and amend the use of solitary confinement here in Louisiana. I am definitely directly impacted. I served 17 years inside of these penal institutions, wrongfully convicted and sentenced sentenced to life in prison. And I've been home 13 years now. And every day we work toward how can we rectify and end these inhumane practices. Breaking down into subcommittees, whether it be faith-based or groups, because we know that congregations are directly and vicariously impacted. We have a jail working group and also a DOC working group. So the last few years, we've made great strides in addressing these issues, right? But the main thing is developing the matrix on how individuals are ending up in these situations while incarcerated is what we're working on now. So having this conversation here with all of you beautiful people on this call, I think it is my honor to actually just sit here and figure out how can we think through reimagining the way that these systems are used. So thank you for having me, and can't wait to get on to the meat and bones of it while I work on this computer.
Nice. I appreciate it. Thank you for your commitment, tenacity, Kiana. I joke sometimes and I tell folks that during the pandemic, we literally had organizers on the ground connecting with each other on like broken phones, you know, with no Wi-Fi, having to like just go into Starbucks and tap into Wi-Fi to like keep folks connected. So Kiana, thank you for that. Part of tonight's presentation, I don't want it just to be folks talking at folks. I want it to be a conversation. So definitely drop any potential questions that you may have in the chat, and I'll ask, you know, Katie and others to like kind of fill those questions when we'll get to the Q&A part, and the panelists will be reacting to those. And then of course, also offering some video examples that kind of exemplify some of these pieces. So we'll be sharing 3 videos, 3 minutes a piece. In the first video here, which I'll share in the chat so you can all have, and again, we'll send a follow-up with all of these resources. But part of our conversation is to get folks to understand how these issues are connected. When it comes to solitary and forced labor, solitary confinement is used to enforce forced labor, if that makes sense. So in other words, you know, when I was incarcerated and I was working for 17 cents an hour, 30 cents an hour, if I refused to work, then I would be placed in solitary confinement, which, you know, we'll get into exactly the torture of it and exactly why it is even, you know, considered torture. But this idea that if you don't work at 7 cents an hour or barely for free at these slave wages, we will then expose you to the torture of solitary confinement and the irreversible damage of solitary confinement as a consequence, right? And during that time, you don't get no time off, etc. But I'll let the video do the talking. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Hopefully my Verizon doesn't do me dirty, Kiana. Let's find out. Give me a second here. Share the screen here. Yes. Hit the share check button. All right. And someone can text me if you can't hear it. See if I just want to make sure we got this.
Slavery never ended. It evolved. It changed. It tricked us into thinking that it doesn't exist, and right under our nose has been right there. My name is Johnny Perez. Before I was incarcerated, I was really into the arts. I loved to draw. I had dreams of becoming an architect because I was always fascinated by landscapes and buildings. The first time I was incarcerated, I was 16 years old, and I've been incarcerated for more than half my life. One of the jobs that I had while I was incarcerated was as a seamstress. I sewed underwears, sheets, and pillowcases. So I started off making 17 cents an hour. If you reach your quota, which for me was 30 dozens of sheets a day, then you have the opportunity to have that amount doubled. So I didn't know it at the time. Each dozen was being sold for about $30 on the outside to outside markets. I had made these people millions of dollars. I was incarcerated 2 days after my daughter was born, so it was important to me that I was there for her. During my incarceration, I did not make enough money to be able to send home to be able to care for her. Working in prison made me feel very dehumanized. It made me feel like I had no autonomy. It made me feel like I was worthless. It made me feel angry. You were not allowed any days off. You were not allowed any sick time. If you did not go to work, then you were sent to solitary confinement, which is 23 hours a day locked inside of a cell the size of your bathroom. Some cells don't have any windows, being separated from your own sanity. And for some people, they just never come back. They're psychologically broken as a result. So today, I am the director of the United States Prison Programs at the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, where I work with solitary survivors like myself, family members, and faith leaders to hold our legislators morally accountable. And I'm also a photographer. What I do today, I would do it for free if rent wasn't so high. Policies and laws exist because taxpayers allow it to happen. If you have a problem with slavery, don't let it happen under your name. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, except for me. Let's pass the Abolition Amendment and end the exception.
And special thanks to Worth Rogers and Bianca Tylek and the team at Ep & Co. who expertly put that together, not only my story, but the story of 12 other storytellers. And one of the reasons I wanted to start off with that video is to really show the relationship, show the relationship between these issues. Oftentimes we talk about issues of mass incarceration as if they just exist by themselves. And these are a set of policies that support each other and work in tandem to continue oppressing people, majority of which are Black and brown folks. So, and I should have gave people a trigger warning. I'll give it to you now, including myself, that some of the videos may trigger folks. And if you are a person who's had this experience, feel free to log off, take a time, get some water, come back, and kind of like lean in. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of open up this conversation with some remarks from the discussion. We're going to go first to you, Reverend Hawkins, and I'm going to also drop the exact questions in the chat so that way our participants can follow along. And they'll also know that I sent you the questions in advance, but we've done Zoom enough times. Yes, the 226th General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church recently adopted a resolution urging an end to prolonged solitary confinement, also supported an overture to amend the 13th Amendment, which allows for forced labor as a punishment for a crime, as we just learned. How can the church leverage these resolutions to galvanize faith communities in advocating for systemic change at the local, state, and national level? And just as a follow-up, but I'll add it, and what specific steps could be taken by faith leaders to ensure that the resolutions translate into tangible actions addressing the human dignity violations associated with both solitary and forced labor? And I know that was long-winded, but folks can read the question in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Johnny. One of the things that the congregations can do and church leadership can do is to make sure that we're doing advocacy on the federal, state, and local levels. We have offices, again, in DC and in New York, but also almost every denomination has an office as well. And all of us work in coalition. There are over 70 of us who gather together once a month to try to address issues that are going on, directly interfacing with members of Congress, trying to get them to pass bills that are pending. We know that quite a few bills, when the Democrats were in control of the House, are still sitting on people's desks, can't get out of committee. So federal, state, and local advocacy. Also, I think that denominations can prepare educational resources. One of the things that happened at our last General Assembly was that many of our members, when we talked about the 13th Amendment, and we also talked about solitary confinement, they were shocked. And several of them stated on the floor of the General Assembly, they had no idea that it was happening to this degree. And I think because prisons are hidden away, we don't know what's going on, really. And we really don't, and those who have been incarcerated know that it's by intentionality. They don't want the public to know what's going on. So we have got to take great efforts in order to become informed. And the church can really prepare educational resources. The Presbyterian Church, that's one of the things that we really do a good job at, of writing documents. I know oftentimes we write too many documents and we have so much to read, but it has a long shelf life, and people read these documents and they can travel all around the country. Another thing that I think that is, in particular with the Presbyterian Church, we got to get engaged with prison ministries. This is not an area of engagement that we have a history with. I know I pastored for over 25 years in Durham, North Carolina, a Covenant Presbyterian Church, and also in Virginia. None of these churches that I pastored had prison ministries, but all around us, African-American congregations were directly involved with prisons. And we know that the Islamic community has vibrant prison ministries. And they're a source of hope for congregations, but they also are a source of information. You can find out what's going on behind prison walls. So we've got to find ways to connect with those who are suffering under the curse of incarceration, because we know that the American penal system is unjust. And we know that innocent people go to prison. We know that people are treated like animals once they get into prison. This has no comparison, but I've been arrested 4 times for direct action. And in the last time in particular, we were in the DC jail. It was inhumane. In the way, and this was just for one night. And I can't imagine what it's like for someone to spend years in solitary confinement, because we know, again, of the psychological, the emotional damage that is done to a human being. So one of the things that we've got to make sure that we are engaged in prison ministries to find out firsthand what's going on and to raise our voice from an educated level. And I think that the resolution itself gives us some direct guidance. It says, and I'm quoting, to call upon state, federal, and local elected officials to enact legislative or administrative reforms ending prolonged solitary confinement. And we know that this happens on every level. The local jails are putting people in solitary confinement. Prisons are putting people in solitary confinement. We underestimate the impact that we can have as advocates doing this work and trying to really reach our legislators, because I do think a lot of them also are very ignorant of what's actually happening behind prison walls.
Thank you for that. And you teased out something that I wrote an op-ed a while back about how prisons not only escape from society, but also it's esoteric in terms of like what's happening inside. Like there are dark places where, you know, it's hard to find out what's happening inside because they're so far from society, but also that there's little engagement and surveillance inside. And one of the things that happens inside, which a lot of folks actually surprised to hear this, is the act of forced labor, which allows me to shift over to Bianca. To my question to you, right, is that, you know, the exception clause of the 13th Amendment allows for forced labor as punishment for a crime. How does this exception perpetuate systemic exploitation? And what are the key challenges in mobilizing a national movement to end this exception? I'll leave it there. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Johnny. So, you know, when we think about 1.8 million people who are incarcerated right now, we know that 800,000 of them are being forced to work. Of those people that are being forced to work, they are being forced to work at times for pennies an hour, with the average pay being 14 cents an hour. But in many states, that being far less or nothing at all. At least 7 states pay people nothing at all. The state of Louisiana pays people 2 cents an hour at times, right? There was a congressional hearing actually about prison labor recently, and a gentleman who had done time at Louisiana at Angola had testified, and in his testimony included this incredibly powerful comment, which is, he said, the difference between 17th and 18th century slavery and 21st century slavery is 2 cents. And if we remember that, and we think that that's how far we've actually come, which is not far at all, right? And so, you know, how does prison slavery extend exploitation? You know, for us as people who do work specifically to end exploitation, whether that's the egregious cost of a call between somebody who's incarcerated and their loved one, or the egregious cost of commissary, or the exploitation of healthcare companies of people who are incarcerated by simply the lack of providing care. Still, with all those examples, the exploitation of labor must be really the leading sort of form of exploitation, because it is the one at the end of the day that brings us closest to history, to the realities of chattel slavery. And so we know today that as much as $18 billion in wages is being stolen from people who are incarcerated. There was an independent study done by economists that, you know, revealed that. And I think it's important for us to understand that when we steal wages from people who are incarcerated, we don't just take them from those incarcerated folks, but we take them from their families. We take them from their children, children who grow up generationally much faster. Most of us, you know, become the caretakers of our parents when we enter our 40s, our 50s, maybe even our 60s if we're lucky. Children of incarcerated parents become their caretakers as early as 17, 18. The minute that they start providing, putting money on their phone calls, the minute that they start providing commissary for their accounts, those children have become the caretakers of their parents, and there are generations of essentially financial instability that happens for children, for their families, and for their communities. Not only, you know, is denying wages to people who are incarcerated an issue of not providing support for their families, but it is also denying victim restitution, right? If you have a restitution sort of order that requires you to pay $10,000 to your victim, how are you paying that at 2 cents an hour? There's one of the gentlemen that we interviewed for the same series that Johnny just played that video from, said that when he had done his analysis of paying restitution at 8 cents an hour, he calculated that it would take him 198 years to pay for the restitution, right? And so it's incredibly, incredibly important to understand that we're denying everybody at the expense, for what benefit, right? Other than what the government and at times corporations are benefiting. So that exploitation is tremendous because we're seeing what those things actually generate, what that labor generates, which is billions of dollars for the economy. In fact, some estimates have as much or as little rather a minimum sort of production of about $13 billion in goods and services, right? That is being generated by people who are incarcerated. So it is an extensive amount of exploitation. And then just want to, add that exploitation is done at, with a heavy hand. People who are incarcerated can be beaten for not working in the fields down in the South, can be denied contact with their families by being denied either visits or phone calls. They can be denied access to commissary, which is life-saving for those who are not eating in the mess hall or need other healthcare needs. They can be put in solitary confinement, which is torture, as we know. They can even be denied parole because of the hit and write-up that hits their record. And I think it's important for us to remember that when we say mass incarceration is a continuation of slavery, it is because at the end of the day, most of these punishments that are ascribed for refusing to work are punishments that date back to chattel slavery. When people who were enslaved refused to work, they were separated from their children. Their children were taken and sold off. They were punished in those ways through that type of family separation. The solitary confinement has its origins in the way that it's even referred to as the hole or the box. These are actually terms that originated during chattel slavery, when people who were enslaved, again, refused orders, were put in hot boxes, denied food, put in isolation in the heat and all of those things. And so remembering that much of what we see as punishments for the refusal to work today turns out to be absolutely the continuation of slavery and that separation. And so this exploitation is absolutely integral to the survival of our system and must be where we start with its breakdown.
And amending the 13th Amendment would actually help us change the very fabric of our society in terms of the dark history of the country that we all share, if you will. I want to go over and shift over to Kiana. I'm gonna drop this in the chat. Kiana, someone who's experienced, of course, the harsh realities of both of these practices. What message, of course, would you say to policymakers? In terms of, what message do you have for policymakers and the public about the human impact of this practice? And then can you discuss your work with Project Detour and Roots of Renewal over in New Orleans, working with young people?
Whoa, it's kind of.
And of course, any reactions to anything that any of the other panelists said.
Yeah, definitely. Before I get started, I want to kind of piggyback on what Bianca just kind of talked about here in Louisiana. In 1996, I was sentenced to serve 2 life terms without the possibility of probation and parole or suspension of sentence. I was wrongfully convicted. I was falsely accused. And all of these different elements that come with the disproportionate effects of being Black in Louisiana. So going to Angola, Louisiana State Penitentiary at 17 years old, and my first week in the field, like we're talking about forced labor, I actually have a book right here by Leanna Dye Pips, which is called Prison Capital, right? Where I'm just kind of just refurbishing a lot of different things to talk about the effects of forced labor, right? The first day that I went to the field in Angola, it had 250 individuals in the field line. I'm at the back of the line. And once we got to where what they call it, your cut. So when I got to my cut, which was 15 miles through the penitentiary, they put us in a cotton field. This was the first time I ever saw growing cotton in my life. And they were like, get in there and pick a sack. The sack hang from my head to my feet. I didn't know what to do, how to start, where to start. So the first day I was only able to pick maybe two piles, 2 bales of cotton. And I was written up for not picking my amount of cotton that day as a first time in the field. That entire week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I kept getting written up because I don't know what to do. My fingers were blistered. I could not pick up my fork, my spoon when it was time to eat when we went back in at 12 o'clock. But after the 4th write-up, I was sent to administrative segregation, which is solitary confinement, which brings me to the space of the question. As someone who has experienced the harsh realities of solitary confinement, I've experienced the harsh reality of modern day slavery here in Louisiana, forcefully. I felt suffocating. I felt the grips of solitary confinement just grabbing on my loins. I'm still trying to escape the shadows. To the powers that be, I say, please don't ignore the screams of those that are in the darkness. Solitary confinement is a torture chamber that shatters the minds and souls of individuals. I've seen friends lost their grip on reality. I've even felt my own sanity slipping at times. We're not just statistics or case numbers. We're human beings, deserving the compassion and dignity to end this practice as a whole. So when we talk about the effects of solitary confinement, let's put a face to solitary confinement. That's my entire campaign in Louisiana. Let's humanize these interactions or these experiences or these cruel and unusual practices in here. As someone who has endured the harsh realities of these spaces, I urge policymakers and the public to recognize the devastating human impact of these practices. Solitary confinement is not only a form of torture, but also a tool of oppression that perpetuates the cycle of trauma and recidivism. I implore that you consider the long-term effects of mental wellness. There are individuals who go into these spaces and do not come out the same way they went in. So when we talk about these issues on the mass level, right? When we talk about these issues to change policies, right? There are ways that we must address them. We can't continue to go in there sugarcoating it like I tell my young people who I train here in Louisiana to actually address these issues. We go in there to give them the harsh and brute reality. In 2022, we were working toward, can everyone hear me? Just to make sure can everyone hear me? In 2022, here in Louisiana, there was a piece of legislation, HB 622, that was aimed to end solitary confinement for juveniles and juvenile detentions here in Louisiana. I work with young people every day with Project Detour, which is a mentoring organization geared to give these young people the tools that they need to become successful. So on our way riding from New Orleans to Tower State Capitol in Baton Rouge, I was preparing these young people like, hey man, sometimes we have to stand up and speak voice to power. We have to allow our vulnerabilities to become our strengths. And when we walked inside of the House committee, at that particular time, we walked in while they were hearing the bill, and none of the legislators were even paying attention to it. They were looking around on their phone, walking out, coming back in, doing all of these other things until 3 of my young men said, hey, I feel like I want to testify. So we filled out the green cards together. These young men got up there and spoke so impactful to how their spaces have been invaded by individuals who can't feel their pain. So once they actually, to make a long story short, once they actually stood up and showed how they can be intricate in this space, the bill left the committee with bipartisan support. Even representatives that did not even wink or look at the piece of legislation said, you know what, I want to help co-author this bill. And they co-authored it all the way through. And that was the year that we passed the piece of legislation that restricted the use of solitary confinement for young people for 4 hours without immediate interviewer to come in to make sure that they're not deemed threats to themselves or others. So that's where we have to come right now. It's not who tell the story, it's how we tell the story. We have to control the narrative so that individuals that can't fathom what these spaces look like, we have to bring them into those spaces. So yes, thank you, Johnny, for that question. That was something, and Bianca, I really commend you on the work that you're doing.
Yeah. No, I tell you, even myself, I've been doing this work now for a solid 10 years with a title, because I was always, free my guy. When I was like 13 years old, I was saying, free my friends. But to hear you say pick cotton, it does something to me, because I'm not used to hearing that in everyday vernacular and language. And like, wow, like people still picking cotton in America today. And that's very real. So in terms of like how you tell the story, no, we need to call it what it is. There's still people in this country who are picking cotton under the threat of the torture of solitary confinement, or worse, death, etc. Bianca outlined in a number of different ways, and folks have experienced it. That really speaks to this piece. And as people of faith, as faith leaders, as having a theological perspective, I want to go and switch over and come back to you, Reverend Jimmy Hawkins. If you can, from a theological perspective, how does solitary confinement conflict with the principles of faith? And what role can faith leaders play in advocating for humane treatment of incarcerated individuals? And just some more kind of prompt here, and you can react to any and all of these. What are the challenges and opportunities in building interfaith coalitions to address these systemic issues like solitary confinement and forced labor? And how can these these collaborations influence public policy, if you will?
Yeah, thanks again for that question. And I just want to applaud everything that's been said beforehand. One of the things that I do want to throw in, Brother Calloway showed the book that he had. I would encourage everyone who hasn't, I'm pretty sure that most of us have already read, but Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. She does an excellent job, not only dissecting the state of mass incarceration and solitary confinement in this country, but she has some excellent suggestions, rationale, strategies near the end of the book. So I encourage especially people of faith to make sure they do that. From a theological perspective, it's already been said, we've got to stop denying the humanity of other human beings. We think that just because someone has been locked up, committed a crime, or not committed a crime, we cannot allow people to be brutalized in prisons. And we have, and what has happened in this country, and it's really a sad reflection of where we are as a people. And again, Michelle Alexander's book talks about this. Up until the 1960s and 70s, we had a different attitude towards incarceration. It was for rehabilitation. There were many more programs, but after this Get Tough on Crime, and ironically enough, what's considered a very progressive state like California started this 3 strikes and you are out. We know that Ronald Reagan and Bush and all of these war on crime, these strategy programs, these policy programs were targeting the poor and targeting people of color, in particular African-American men. And so the attitude became punishment. So after the 1970s to today, we don't care about people who are incarcerated. We don't want to see that they have programs. They have to pay for everything that they get in prison. The food is minimal. And so we've got to change that attitude and challenge that in this country, because it's still a get tough on people who have been found guilty of a crime, whether they are guilty or not. So that's where a faith perspective comes in. We've got to talk about the fact that everyone is made in the image and likeness of God. Everyone is a child of God, and everyone is worthy of respect, of care, and no human being is beyond rehabilitation. And really, that's an opportunity for us to see that people do have access to education. They do have access to the basic necessities of life, that a person should not have to scrounge in order to get a few dollars in order to buy soap and a woman to buy tampons and the things that are needed for everyday life. So we've got to bring the humanity back. And that's where a faith perspective comes in, that we believe that God is a God of love and that God is a God of justice. And the justice of God is radically different from the justice of human beings. The justice of God is restorative. It wants to build people up. And God does not seek to throw people away or cast them aside. So I think that the church has been more influenced by politics today than the politics have been influenced by church. So we've got to lift high the prophetic voice of the church, saying that this is what Scripture teaches us. Again, Jesus rejected no one. No one. We have tax collectors. Matthew was a tax collector. They were despised. We have a situation where a woman is caught up in what they consider to be breaking the law of Moses, were caught in the act of adultery. And they gave Jesus this trick question: should we stone her or should we let her go free? Knowing that if he said let her go free, he's breaking the law. If he says stone her, he has no compassion. And Jesus said, let the one of you who is without sin cast the first stone at this woman. And so we have lost all of that compassion, that understanding that all of us are again, children of God worthy of a fair benefit. So the church has got to get back to our roots. And the last thing I would say, Johnny, is that the church has lost contact with the biblical Jesus. We're more caught up in what our pastor might teach us. We're more caught up in the tradition of our denominations, the culture of our church. And we really don't. I'm amazed with how few people are familiar with the four Gospels. If you read the four Gospels and study the four Gospels, your life will be changed. Because Jesus is a revolutionary. He's counterculture. He goes around lifting up people who have been cast out. The first sermon he preached, Luke 4, I've come to set free those who are in prison. And so we've got to get back to who we are called to be. If you are a Christian in particular, then you've got to understand what the mandate for being a Christian is. It's all about loving God, loving your neighbor, loving others as you love yourself. It's all about understanding that you cannot judge anyone and just cast people out based on a sense that it makes you feel better about yourself. Well, at least I don't do that. And so we also got to understand that as we look at strategies, and the last thing I would say is that for people of faith, we got to reframe the conversation. It's interesting when you talk to people, let's just say in a rural area, might be a more conservative area, where they are they're tough on crime and have this strong negative attitude. But if you go in there talking about, well, we want you to get involved with the criminal justice system, they're not going to connect with that. So you got to talk about it from a spiritual perspective, that this is what Christ is calling us to do, to be people of justice, that to be a Christian means to be just, to treat people fairly. And we've got to talk to them in a language that's more spiritually oriented, that talks about this biblically oriented, that teaches people how the Bible informs us on true justice. Again, how God has a restorative element of justice. And because again, oftentimes, the advocacy that we do for the Presbyterian Church with Presbyterians, people say, well, you're just bringing politics into the church. What about separation of church and state? All of those are misunderstandings of what we're trying to do. We're trying to be true to what it means to be a disciple of Christ. We're trying to be true to what it means to be a follower of God and to recognize that God is calling us to receive the salvation that's freely given, but also to share God's salvation with others freely, without judgment.
Very powerful words, Reverend Hawkins. I really appreciate that. Sometimes when I talk to faith leaders, I think that they are remiss in terms of like the power that we collectively have. I think about faith leaders as uniquely positioned to hold our legislators morally accountable to their moral values. And then also faith leaders are deeply connected with the community in ways that others are not. And when you combine the role of responsibility and moral authority and moral responsibility, along with the direct connection with the community, that does equal political power. And we've seen it time and time again, not only in Louisiana and Kiana State, but very recently, oh, well, not so long ago, we saw it also in New York and also in New Jersey. What's gonna happen now, I'm gonna share this 1-2-minute video, come back, ask the panelists 2 more questions, and then open it up for Q&A. Sorry, you know how you gotta press that little button that says add sound? There we go. There we go, thanks.
We can use our common sense to understand and know that this is not right, that this is not justice.
It sounds simplistic, but it is mental and sometimes physical torture. I had dreams as a young person, and they weren't to be an incarcerated person. They weren't dreams of being in solitary confinement. They weren't dreams of self-harm.
The world that we live in is not evil. However, there are evil things that happen in this world.
You will have pushback, must see the world as it is, and then start to bend it toward the way it should be.
We make mistakes, but we are not those mistakes, and we should not live out the rest of our lives in that mistake. People should not die because they made a mistake. So many people have died in solitary confinement.
Before I got involved, I had no idea what was going on in our prisons and jails. No matter how small you think your effort is, it matters. It matters to the person who spends 23 to 24 hours a day alone in a cell.
We are created in God's image, and that comes with obligations, which completely flies in the face of any possible justification one could ever have for torture.
We have to walk into that space and be honest and be transparent and give them the facts because they don't know.
They got to hear it directly from us. They finally realized that we were the experts.
Let's put a stop to it.
Well, it happens everywhere. If there's a prison, it happens.
And that is definitely true. The prison, it happens regardless of the name or how it's called or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and ask 2 more questions, and I do want to open it up for Q&A. I know that folks have questions and have already shared some thoughts. And I also want to respect folks' time and things like that. Hold on a minute. That video is an excerpt from Torture in Our Name, which is one of NRCAT's resources that equips faith leaders, not only with examples from 3 different states, New York, New Jersey, and Louisiana, but also serves as a catalyst for you all to have conversation in your respective spaces about what would it mean for you and your faith community to organize around the issue of solitary confinement. There's different ways that you can use it, et cetera, and we will share some of those intentionally. And before we get to that, I'm going to go ahead and continue, kind of conclude with 2 questions, one to Kiana and one to Bianca. And Kiana, and this is, I was really, when I read about this, I always like to hear about these types of changes, but you played a crucial role in eliminating non-unanimous juries in Louisiana. What lessons from that campaign can be applied to current efforts of ending to end solitary confinement across the states, and even, I didn't add it there, but also forced labor as well? Just some reactions to that.
Thank you, Johnny. Great question. The campaign to eliminate non-unanimous juries in Louisiana taught me a valuable lesson that can be applied in current efforts to end solitary confinement, right? First, build a diverse coalition of stakeholders, including directly impacted individuals, community leaders, and advocacy groups. I believe that is real intricate to have different energies into the space to help really push the initiative where it needs to be. Reverend Hawkins spoke a little bit earlier about Michelle Alexander's book, which is a great book, and that's something that I put in the laps of my young people as soon as they come up out of the gates, because there's a quote in there that I want them to find, right? And in that book, Michelle states that People returning home from incarceration is the only social group that America has permission to openly hate. That is a powerful sentiment to really sit back and ponder on. And inside of this space, I believe that leveraging storytelling and personal narratives to humanize the issues and raise public awareness is very, very, very intricate. Engaging in strategic grassroots organizing. That's what brought that campaign, the Yes on 2 campaign, the non-unanimous jury campaign. And for people that's not familiar with it, the non-unanimous jury campaign was geared toward the non-unanimity inside of Louisiana. At one particular time, Louisiana and Oregon were the only 2 states that practiced that. 10 out of 12 jurors can say that you're guilty, and you will be sentenced to get on that capital offense and sentenced to life. It was so dear to me because I was found guilty twice on non-unanimous juries. First trial in 1994. 1995 was a 10-2, sentenced to serve 2 lives. Case was remanded, and the second trial was in 2001. And that trial, that proceeding was also 10-2, and I was sentenced to serve 34 years. That's why I was eager enough to lead the Southeastern Louisiana campaign, knocking on doors, organizing, training, mobilizing, educating people around this issue to push for policy reform. And we had a historical, and the historical lineage of that is that in the 1898 Republican convention that was held here in Louisiana, clearly stated in black and white that the non-unanimous jury is deemed to preserve white superiority here in the state, to eliminate blacks from the juror proceedings, to eliminate the voices of marginalized people on these boxes. So having the ability to overturn Jim Crow's last stand here in Louisiana was huge. And by applying these lessons, we could create a movement that can not only end solitary confinement, but also transform the criminal legal system to prioritize humanity, equality, and redemption. And that's the space that I believe is real intricate, being able to allow people to have ownership in the way that we re-envision public safety in our state. And that was just an example on how collectively, when we fight, we win. Thank you, Johnny, for that question.
Nice, I appreciate that. Thanks. So much here. So Reverend Hawkins talked a little bit about how faith leaders can engage and some of the strategies there. And a lot of folks don't notice, but Bianca is one of my favorite organizers. And you're very creative in the way that you apply pressure and represent like the people on the ground, including a lot of the phone work, which we haven't talked about some of that. But as you started off, you talked about how Worthrise works actually at the cross-section of financial exploitation in the prison system. So my next question is directly to you before we open it up for questions, since we do have some in the queue. That's that Worthrise has successfully led campaigns against financial exploitation. And thank you, Kiana. Kiana does have to jump off. In fact, Kiana, can you you can say 2 more words before you have to jump off. We know you got class, and we definitely want you to get that degree, brother.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. I'll definitely have a class. My information is definitely offered and available for anyone on the call to have any type of sidebar, parking lot conversations or questions. Please do not hesitate to reach out. I love everyone, and I want to leave you with the quote that faith is taking.
No, you said spades. Yeah, I play spades. You just on my phone.
No problem. Faith. I want to leave with just one quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. Faith is taking a step without seeing the entire staircase. So that's what we do when we enter these arenas, so that we can ultimately change these spaces that will really center people and not policy. So thank everyone for having me on this call. Sorry I have to leave so early.
Nah, don't apologize for finishing that degree. Get it. Go ahead, man. You started off later than everybody else, so go ahead, get it in. We'll follow. We'll make sure we share your information and your remarks, Kiana. Pleasure. And back to you, Bianca. So Worthrise has successfully led campaigns against financial exploitation in the prison system. Wonder how can the lessons learned from these campaigns be applied to the broader fight, to, of course, end mass incarceration, end the exception, to end the exception and also work around solitary.
Yeah, for sure. So just to give people a little bit of a picture, we run a lot of campaigns at Worth Rises that really on a three-pronged strategy that we swear by, live by, and know is the secret sauce to, having won 15 legislative bills in the last 7 years, and actually crumbling industries. And so that's creating your narrative change or narrative foundation for your campaign. Secondly, creating the policy change that undermines the industry and how it works in that area. And thirdly, going after the corporations or financial interests that are invested in it. And so I think the very, first thing I would just say is follow the money. I think it's the number one thing that I, tell people over and over and over and over is for everyone who's suffering, there's someone who's benefiting. And part of the goal must be to figure out who that is, because so long as that person's benefiting behind closed doors, they are advocating and lobbying for policies that hurt our people. And so these things wouldn't actually exist if there weren't people who were benefiting, whether that be financially, whether that be politically, whether that be through power. There are, any number of ways somebody can benefit off this system. And so I think understanding who that is helps us get to sort of unlocking what arguments, what narratives are being pushed that are counter to ourselves, to the policies that we want, and to truth often. And so that's really, I think, the number one thing that I would say is understand who stands to benefit so that you can unpack and do your work in the other direction. I know we're like tight on time, so I'm gonna not go too long, but just want to say that I think, again, going through that narrative, that policy, and the corporate angle, I think are ways in which we can, tackle a lot of these things. In solitary confinement, I always ask the question, who designed these spaces for people to be in them? There was an architecture firm, there was an engineering firm, there was a construction firm, there were plans, budgets, $1 billion worth that were approved for all of this. Like dozens of people, if not hundreds of people, that signed off on plans to design spaces that people would spend 23 to 24 hours a day on. If you go to architecture websites of companies that have built prisons, they will tell you how proud they are of the way in which they have borrowed light from the outside for the inside by simply painting walls white. Like this is what they celebrate, and they get awards for. And so, deeply, I say, like, truly start questioning who's involved and where and how are they in some ways, benefiting. And so I'll stop there.
Nice. Thank you so much. There's a lot to unpack there. In terms of action steps and like in the moment, I'm going to highlight my fellow MFI board member, Bruce Turnbull from JCPA's question around what can be done now. He says, what is something that can be done now? I know President Biden promised to end solitary as a 2020 campaign promise. Is it possible to still get him to take action when he leaves office this January? And I'm going to add the same question around forced labor. So Bianca, can you kind of answer a similar question around forced labor in this current presidency in terms of the amendment campaign? I can speak to the solitary piece, and we do have some calls to action after our colleague Reverend Francois gives us a board reflection.
Absolutely. So I think, well, there's so many things. Obviously, the president, like in the candidates that are currently running for office can also endorse certain policies. That is like one action that can absolutely be taken. President Biden can in fact end forced labor in the federal system. as a minimum, as an executive order before, he can't amend the US Constitution on his own, but can certainly be an advocate, a voice, a supporter, and can do that for the federal system through a EO. So all those things are things that are doable right now. And as I said, the candidates that are currently running can also run on these platforms and help elevate their the solutions that we see.
Thank you for that. And at the federal level with, in solitary, we have a federal bill, the End of Solitary Confinement Act. But beyond the federal bill, yes, we do have a sitting president that vowed to end solitary confinement on the campaign trail and has yet to fulfill that promise. There was a little bit of language in a executive order that got passed a few years ago that was specifically around policing as a direct pressure of the people on the ground and in the streets protesting to yet another officer killing an unarmed Black person. But yeah, the president still has the same power to do the same for solitary. I'll tell you, part of the reason we name a lot of our bills behind the Nelson Mandela is because the United Nations years ago deemed anything over 15 days to be torture, and we are one of the only few countries in the world that grotesquely abuses that. One of our board members, Jack Morris, spent almost 40 years in solitary confinement in Pelican Bay, just to give people a scope of how long we keep people inside of these spaces, and I myself spent 3 years. Collect a deep breath, y'all. Collect a deep breath. I am going to, let's see, this is crucial in Georgia now. We have planned 3,000 beds, presented almost 2 million out of Kim's Slush Fund, insight there. I want to pass it over to Reverend Francois to give us a board reflection, and then I'm going to share some action steps that people can take on and take with them. I know that we were kind of scheduled to go a little bit longer and some of the times got mixed up. 2 different messages came out. I think we started a little bit early, etc. But I'm a big fan of quality over quantity and want to make sure that we give you all of the doses and make sure that we follow up and encourage you all to, of course, come back to next month. But we're not done yet. Reverend Francois, can you please give us a board reflection? Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you so much, Brother Johnny, for your leadership tonight, and Bianca and Reverend Jimmy for your expertise and the wonderful witness that you live out in the world. This is an important conversation for EMI for the very same reason that Reverend Jimmy named, is that the carceral state, the entire carceral continuum in all of its manifestations are a threat to the image of God. This is not just a war on drugs gone wrong. This is not just a war on poverty turned into a punishment machine. This is not even just a war on the poor. This is literally a war on the image of God, because to destroy human life, and that is what's happening in isolation and in forced labor and everything in between that happens in carceral context, is an affront to what it means for human beings to be created in the image of God. And there must be a way that we reclaim that type of anthropology. This is a political failure. This is an economic failure because of a well-tooled system that is intended to decide who can be considered fully human and who needs to be controlled, who needs to be exploited, and who needs to be the profit-producing engine for those who live at the very top. We are faced again with the way that racial capitalism does its work of allowing certain communities to be perceived as disposable, to be perceived as dangerous, in order for money to be hoarded and sent in a single direction. What I appreciate about what I've heard today and what EMI is committed to is that we know that we cannot talk about the crisis of incarceration if we only want to think about certain forms of domination in this country. In the carceral state is an interlocking system that charts out death, that charts out denial of basic human rights along the lines of race, along the lines of class, along the lines of gender, along the lines. That is how we understand that dismantling this system, and ingredient to that is solitary torture, the torture of solitary confinement and forced labor. But we understand that we must have an intersectional approach to what it means to value all human flesh, and to be clear that no body, literal body, deserves what happens to our sisters and our brothers out of sight. Once I read Foucault said that prisons took punishment out of sight. And that is still true, but it is what I've heard today. It has also taken slavery out of sight. In order for us to protect what little humanity we have left, as long as we don't see the torture, we don't see the punishment, we don't see the slavery, we protect ourselves in some way. But none of our humanity is protected if the humanity of any one of our sisters, any one of our siblings, any one of our brothers is being damned and condemned and shredded the way it is behind prison bars. And as has been said so aptly tonight, and as I've heard many times, it is happening in our name. Torture is happening in our name. The shredding of humanity is happening in our name. The trauma inflicted onto human psyche is happening in our name. Brothers and sisters are being denied the gift of being human, which shouldn't be a gift. It should be a universal given because we breathe. But we have made being human a gift because we're able to deny it to certain folk, and we use our prisons as tools to do that. And so EMI says no. It says no more to this unholy spirit of punishment, this unholy ghost of exploitation, this unholy project of treating people as if they're disposable in order to continue a system of a very complex system of racial capitalism that is keeping rich, keeping corporations rich, keeping white males primarily rich at the expense of so many people who deserve more for no other reason but then because they're human. And so EMI, we are meeting in 2 weeks in Chicago to develop our 5-year strategy, our 5-year strategic plan and priorities. And this will be top of mind in our conversation because of the offerings that we have heard tonight, but also because we know, intuitively we know, that forced labor and solitary confinement are threats to the very image of God that every human being possesses and carries. So to all my brothers and sisters that are here today, I hope that you will take this information, take your convictions, take the discomfort that you heard tonight to your colleagues, to your family members, to your children, to your parents, to your fellow parishioners, your fellow congregants, your fellow sisters and brothers of faith, in order for us to know that what allows this to live is our silence. And we are clear that our silence is not protecting us. Our silence is doing a violence to those we know and those we don't know. So I look forward to continuing this work and the ways that EMI will amplify these particular issues, and so that those who we have the capacity to influence, those who are in our circle of influence, and I'm grateful that EMI has a pretty large circle of influence, that they will hear from us and we will get this done, get these things done.
Nice. Thank you so much for that, Reverend Francois. I have some five action steps that folks can take. I already dropped one in the chat. Please feel free to download the chat, but also we will be following up with these particular action steps, and our panelists may have additional action steps and they maybe add post-conversation. The first one is, of course, please support our federal bill and the Solitary Confinement Act, which seeks to limit the use of solitary confinement down to 4 hours, like we did in Louisiana and other states that we've seen proven to be effective methods to handling solitary confinement. The second piece, of course, support the Abolition Amendment. As we know, slavery is still illegal. It's still legal. The Abolition Amendment is sponsored by Senators Jeff Merkley and Cory Booker, along with Congresswoman Nikema Williams out of Georgia. And of course, connect directly with Bianca on that. And of course, EMI will continue sending that. And of course, connect with Worthrisers on Instagram as well. We can use all the public amplification that we can on these issues. If you are a person who experienced solitary confinement, please join our national network. It hopes to support support solitary survivors through advocacy work, education and public education, and mentoring. Oh, sorry, let me give you the right link here. And again, all of this stuff will be sent out, but I know that it's for a lot of folks it's useful to have it right here in the moment. And you can always download the entire chat, which has also a wealth of information, including all the things we've already discussed. I dropped that in the chat as well. Just two more things. One of the things we like to really do at NRCAT is to give faith leaders the resources that they can just take. And again, using a plant reference to here and just add water, and you have everything you need to make it happen, and to kind of consult and have these conversations in your own respective communities. So please check out the number of faith resources that we have, including our video resources and toolkits to organize conversations in your respective faith spaces. Lastly, we need all of your help to spread the word on not only the Abolition Amendment, which you can use any one of those videos, and also, you know, the videos that I showed around the organizing around solitary confinement to encourage friends, family, and community members to engage. And lastly, please, please, please continue engaging MFI in these monthly conversations. I've been to so many conferences in the last 10 years, and it's seldom this level of follow where you can come to a conference, then the participants actually get together post-conference and strategize and plan and build community and keep the fire going, not only until our next conference, but in between times. And in the next quarter, you know, I would argue that is even more pivotal than ever for us to have these spaces increase. So please join us next month. I believe it's the last Thursday, Katie. We'll follow, but I believe it's the last Thursday where we'll talk about voter suppression, I believe.
September 26th, last Thursday.
Nice, thank you. So with that being said, thank you. Quick survey. So please take the survey that's in the chat. Download the entire chat. If you don't know those 3 little dots on the bottom of the chat, you press that and it gives you the ability to download the chat or the top. Yes, there we go, the drop down. But we'll be sending out all of the resources that we shared in the chat along with you. Also follow up with the invitation to come back next month. With that being said, we're not going to drag it, y'all. Thank you. Peace and love. And then please be safe and enjoy your weekend, y'all. Bye.